In January of 2020, and I may have talked about this before, my friend Lynn joined us in Provo for the Mormon Transhumanist Conference, along with our friend Drew Heaton. And but Lynn and I, the first time I met Lynn, I had flown in to do some visit her and do some site work also in Tulsa, and we were doing nerdy education reform tourism and looking at all the local foundations, and we ended up at Old Parkland, which is sort of like the choicest exclusive invitation only Dallas office space. And it was a former hospital, and then later it was built up, and I describe it sort of a combination of Monticello, the Franklin Mint, and an LDS temple. Like, so it's very colonial and very dramatic, but the proportions are not quite right. It's sort of like it got mashed up and it didn't quite fit. But we went in and we hadn't intended to go inside, but it was MLK Day. And we pulled up, and there was a statue with a person like waving this flag, and I really wanted to get a picture of the statue. So we hopped out, and as we did, actually someone came up, and Lynn said, "Well, you know, I'm in town with a friend visiting," and they said, "Oh, well, you'll want to see the debate room." And so we end up going to this debate room, which you see through the door of this portico, but it's got about 75 desks with like gilded leather inlay, tufted leather chairs, and they have special events there, special debate opportunities. But it's this round room that's overseen by, on the one side, this big Athena statue, and on the other side, it's this sort of bloody Ides of March painting. And so we wandered in, and there was no one in the building, and we were thinking, wow, like what's going on here? Like what happens in this space? Why is this here? And we came in through the back, and then we walked across the circular room. It's all very, classical, very deluxe, even though this building was only built, I think, in like 2015 or 16. Like people don't pay for that level of woodwork. It was like all wood, a round room. It was very expensive. And we came through the other side, and we ended up in this 2-story foyer with this carved portico, and you've got the owl over the top, and it says, the power of speech is given to all, but wisdom to a few. Right. And so there's sort of like a certain level of domination and eugenics in that statement, right? Like only a few of us are wise enough to make the decisions for others. And so I wanted to take a moment, because I think what I'm trying to sort of go into, both in the history of radio eugenics and synthetic biology and animation, is all embodied in the wall of these paintings. And these paintings are all recent. They're like from 2016 forward. There's more paintings in the room than these, but I think this wall really is a tell about the program. So I have closer up versions, but you can see. So I believe that at the bottom is FDR and Eisenhower on the one side, on the left, on the bottom, and then on the right is Churchill and Truman. And then above FDR and Eisenhower is Watson and Crick and their discovery of the double helix of DNA. And on the other side, you have Steve Jobs, and you have the apple with the bite out of the apple. And so I'm going to tell you how I interpret this within the context. Now, I will say in front of this doorway, there are 4 brass lamps that at the base have inlaid plaques, and most of them are about private property and securing your property and liberty and freedom, which I think ultimately there's this false narrative that you're going to go on blockchain and have free markets and liberty, when really what the global brain wants is for you to have a perception of liberty within limited options, and then for them to track your movements, so that can be used to build out the global neural network. But the idea and the premise of free markets and free agents in this is really important. And then the fact that ultimately all of life itself will become property. In my way of thinking, eventually it will be consolidated simply down to the BlackRock Aladdin computer is what, they'll just incorporate the world as a DAO, and we will all be owned by the earth. So
Yeah, and I'll just real quick interject that, I'm always arguing with people about property, and a lot of people are thinking property in terms of, hey, I want to own a home and I want to be secure in my home and I want to own a car or whatever. And overwhelmingly, I mean, like way overwhelmingly, the property is actually used to dominate and exclude people from owning a home and having these basic necessities. So property is the exact tool, the legal tool that's used to justify a great deal of horrors and actually theft of liberty all over the world. And that's what kind of blows my mind around a lot of people that are like libertarian minded, is they just they're not actually seeing that's, forget about the theory, look at the real world, look how the real world actually operates, and it's disconnected from the theory. So I thought I would just throw that out there.
Yeah. Okay, so this is just a little bit closer up. I apologize that the pictures are not better, but I think so. This is sort of my interpretation in terms of the roles that these individuals play in my understanding of this Global Brain Project. So you have FDR. Again, there is a mythology, at least among the sort of liberal set, about FDR. Ultimately, he was put in place to save capitalism and to further engender sort of divisions racially around like protections that were given to certain classes of labor and not extended to Black communities. And he and Churchill collaborated on this sort of in the pre-war era. I think it's the Atlantic Conference. Essentially, it was laying out what would happen after the war was over around markets and market access, right? And so FDR got the ball rolling on Bretton Woods, what would become under Truman the World Bank and the IMF, and the central banking structure. And then you have Eisenhower, who again presided over the turning up of the Cold War, the heat in the Cold War, and got DARPA set up and sort of helped establish the military apparatus to, weaponize space and the atmosphere. And then you have Churchill. And so one of the things I'm intrigued with Churchill lately in the work that I've been doing around the global brain is that there was quite a bit of interest in the early 20th century around like I said, the paranormal, psychical research, the idea of applying scientific principles to more esoteric subjects. A lot of it involved looking towards India, and Churchill has his own baggage in that regard. But this was also informing early science fiction. So H.G. Wells, it's sort of the intersection of the Fabian socialists and the spiritualists, including Arthur Balfour, who later helped, enable the Balfour Declaration and create the State of Israel and became the prime minister. Like, he was part of this Institute for Psychical Research. So these aren't just crackpot individuals; they're very elite connected individuals. And within that space of sort of eugenics with the Huxleys and H.G. Wells, H.G. Wells was already writing about atomic weapons in 1912 and had quite a bit of influence on Churchill and his idea towards the weapons. And so there's part of me that wonders if there's some aspect of like the inner workings of meditation and Indian like meditative practice, where they imagine accessing alternative states of consciousness in a weaponized form and unleashing that and trying to get in and use that for their colonial project. And I do feel like that the Theosophists were part of that. And Fritz Kunst, who worked closely with Julius Stolman, he was in India with Annie Besant. Now, he's North American, but he came up in India. And clearly at the highest levels, there was a lot of interchange and interest in applying sort of a Western scientific outlook towards these very powerful cultural practices, and then ultimately trying to figure out how to leverage them towards their empire building project. So then we have Truman, and Truman's role in all of this was that he was the, helped usher in the United Nations and the Atomic Energy Commission sort of in the post-war era. So we've got, that's sort of how I'm seeing these four individuals in the space, at least as pertains to sort of the global neural network control program. And so then we have Watson, Watson and Crick with the DNA, and Jobs, and Steve Jobs. He has the Macintosh computer, and then he has a desktop with Pixar's movie Up on it. And again, that sort of altered consciousness and like transforming stages of life. And behind him, you have the quintessential taking the bite out of the apple, the bite of knowledge. And so I think those two, for me, invoke very clearly the engineering mindset. That on the one hand, you're engineering life, but you've reduced life to a series of beads, colored beads, color-coded beads that you're putting on this armature and that you can engineer your own way. There's a little arrow there, and on the handle of the drawer is a star. And I can't quite figure out if it's what kind of star it is, if it's a starfish. There are quite a number of people who are operating in this space around the Global Brain Project, both in the 19th century, early 20th century, and even up until recently, who have different approaches towards evolution beyond Darwinian evolution, being more closely aligned with the idea of Lamarck, who was a French, he predated Darwin, and his idea that you could acquire traits after birth that would be inherited by your progeny. So that there was a window that you didn't come out as a finite thing, that your essence of your being could change at some point, and then that change could be passed along. And then that's been more connected through like the idea of epigenetic trauma. But there are quite a number of these people who are doing the engineering who imagine engineering after the birth process has happened, that engineering will happen. And so I think the Lamarckian aspect of the evolution is really important, both for what was going on with eugenics in the early 20th century, as well as what's continuing on today in the context of synthetic biology. And then to me, again, the mirror images of engineering pixels to create the animated reality that you want, and then to control life in a digital format, and then controlling the building blocks of life through the engineering program and at a DNA level. Now, I'm not totally convinced that it's strictly just DNA. I feel very much like water might be a part of this, something about like what Tom Cowan talks about, structured water. And H2O and the fourth phase of water is part of that. It's in tandem with the DNA. It's not just exclusively DNA, but that's how they think. They think they're engineering all of the stuff with the beads and now the CAD interface.